This is a WWN Publishing Group recording. Copyright 2017, all rights reserved. This is an abridged version of Hot Georgia Rein by Martha Sweeney to make the story appropriate for all listeners on YouTube. Read to you by the author. If you want to read the complete story, you can find the ebook or paperback online. Links are provided below in the description. Chapter 12, Henry. "Well, looky who's joining us for dinner, honey," Mrs. Abney exclaims back in the house over her shoulder. "Who?" Mr. Abney replies from most likely the living room, since I can hear the television on in the background. "Our daughter, Ivy, and a guest who she brought with her," Mrs. Abney states playfully. "Pete and who?" Mr. Abney questions. "Ivy and me," I confirm, walking into the living room after kissing Mrs. Abney on the cheek. Ivy is quick to move toward her father, knowing that if we linger too much in the foyer, that our parents will start up one of their weird, bantering skits. I love her parents' oddness, and hope that one day in the future Ivy and I will be like that too, even though I know we kind of already are. "Oh," Mr. Abney exclaims when he sees us. "Ivy and Henry. Well, nice of you two to join us." "Funny, Papa," Ivy returns, kissing his cheek. She shifts around the coffee table to say hello to Nana and Pops. "Hi, Mr. A," I greet, sticking out my hand. "What is this?" Mr. Abney scoffs. "His hand," Ivy confirms, sitting down on the couch. "I see that," Mr. Abney says. "Why is he sticking it at me?" "I think he wants you to shake it or something," Ivy teases. "Why?" Mr. Abney quips playfully, inspecting my hand as if it's something he's never seen before. "Don't know," Ivy goads. "I heard it's a thing some people do." "Well, in this house we hug," Mr. Abney reminds, pulling me toward him. "That we do," Nana agrees. "I think there's something wrong with him," Mr. Abney states, releasing me. He puts his hands on my shoulders as he looks me up and down. "Why's that?" Ivy checks, playing along. "I can't get my arms around him like I used to," Mr. Abney shares. "I think he's swollen, might be ill or something." "I doubt it, Papa," Ivy laughs. "Go lie down next to her," Mr. Abney directs. "If you're sick, I don't want to catch it, but she will. She's all about cooties from you." "Have you boinked her yet?" Pops, Ivy's grandfather, asks with a grin. My mouth falls open while Ivy can't help but snicker at his forwardness. "Back in our day, we were boinking by the time we were 14, Nana adds. "That's because you were already married," Mrs. Abney reminds. "Or were we?" Nana goads with a wink. "I think she's flirting with you," Ivy teases. "Well, if you ain't gonna boink her, does that mean you're gonna at least marry her so you can?" Pops directs, staring me down. "Pops," Ivy defends. "He just lost his wife." "Wouldn't stop me if I married the wrong woman," Pops replies. He looks to Nana. "If I did, the second she was gone, I'd marry you like a hobo on a ham sandwich." "Same for me," Nana returns with her own grin. Ivy blushes a little. "We're just waiting on Grady, and then we'll eat," Mrs. Abney announces, changing the subject. "Where is he?" Ivy inquires. "Don't know," Mrs. Abney replies. "He doesn't tell us much of what he does or doesn't do." "Do you need help, Mama?" Ivy checks, standing up. "No, Sweet Pea. I've got it all covered, thanks." Mrs. Abney refuses. "You hang out with your guest." Ivy nods and sits back down. "Guest?" Grady questions from somewhere outside the dining room. "Who's our guest?" I stand up when I see him enter the kitchen. "Hey, Grady," I greet. "Good to see you." "Hey, man," Grady replies, eyeing Ivy for some reason. "What are you doing here?" "Brought Ivy home since it was raining," I inform. "Told you it was gonna rain," Grady teases, swatting at her before giving me a hug. Since Ivy left for college, Grady and I have become closer. It took some time for him to open up, but he's a good guy. Grady feels like Ivy can do no wrong in the family's eyes, which I can see since she's the only daughter and the oldest, but he gets away with just as much shit, if not more, than her. Grady's just never found himself yet, always comparing himself to others, rather than to who he is and who he wants to be. "Yeah, well, a little rain never hurt anyone," Ivy quips. "Well, Ivy can be just as deadly," Grady says with some sarcasm and possibly spite. I'm not sure why he's being mean. "Time to eat," Mrs. Abney declares, ending the brawl that seems to be brewing between Ivy and Grady. I'm confused by their behavior. Ivy's finally home. You think that he'd be happy to see her since it's been years. I know they only go up to see her a few times each year, which gives him more attention here. What I hate is that she's going back in about a week. Maybe that's why Grady's upset. Ivy got to escape this town while he feels like he's been left behind. I know the feeling and empathize with the guy for that issue. But I've accepted my choices and plan to make changes. I'm not so sure I can say the same about Grady. Dinner with the Abneys is great as always. While we have one of Mrs. Abney's famous pies, Grady starts acting a little weird again. Most of the topic of conversation revolves around Ivy, so I can see where he might be resentful, but it's not like they talk about her incessantly when she's not around. I would know since I've had many dinners with them over the years where they talk about Grady and encourage him in something they saw or heard. Did you tell him yet? Grady asks, looking to Ivy. Grady John Abney, Mrs. Abney warns. What? He feigns. Your sister is home for 2 weeks, Mr. Abney reminds. There's no need to be picking a fight that you will lose. Who says I'd lose? Grady quips. When your mother and I are your contenders, Mr. Abney directs. Me. Yes, Papa. Grady cowers, though I see irritation in his eyes. After dessert, I stay and finish watching the baseball game while Ivy helps her mother clean up in the kitchen. I'd normally offer to help, but I don't want to make Grady feel uncomfortable and want to give Ivy and her mom some time alone, even if it's just in the next room. I look back on them from time to time, catching them chatting and giggling on occasion. I can't make out what they're saying, but it feels really good to see Ivy back in this house again. Pops falls asleep in his chair, and Nana covers him with a blanket before shuffling off to the room, which is just beyond the far side of the living room. Grady disappears sometime before the game ends, and Mr. and Mrs. Abney just bid goodnight, leaving Ivy and me, the last two awake in the room. It's odd, I say, turning to face Ivy more as she sits on the opposite end of the couch from me. Since entering the house, she's avoided me a little bit. I'm confident that she's not sure how to act around me in front of her parents. I don't blame her. It's like we're 16 all over again. What is? Ivy asks, looking up. Seeing you in this house again, I share. Seeing you here and in general. She nods but doesn't say a word. I'm glad you're back, I admit, clearly. I chuckle, even if it's just for a couple of weeks. Yeah, she hums slowly, picking at the ends of her shirt. I want to ask her about when she's planning on going back to New York, but I think it's still too soon to discuss. Plus, I don't want to really think about it. I'd rather get in as much time with her as I can to convince her to either stay or to see if maybe I could go back with her. Pops snorts, waking himself up. Ivy and I laugh at the sound. You okay, Pops? Ivy checks. Yeah, he replies, looking around the room. You need help to get to your room? I inquire. Nah, he refuses. Just hands up. I move to him, smiling at Ivy at how Pops contradicted himself. Once in front of him, I pull Pops to a standing position after I've got a good grip on his arms. Thanks, Pop huffs. You're welcome, I reply, placing my hand on his shoulder. Pops looks at my hand and then up at me. To make sure you stay upright until you reach the door, I remind. Pops offers me a smile and then starts to shuffle toward his bedroom. Once I know he's got a small light on and a hand on his cane, I close the door behind him. Not much has changed, really, I announce quietly, sitting down on the couch closer to Ivy. No? She questions. No, I confirm, tugging on her sleeve. What? She asks, despite recognizing my arousal. I lift a brow and reply. It's weird, she returns. We're not 16 anymore, I remind. So? So it's not weird, I challenge. So what if someone sees us? It's no different than what they've seen before. Plus, it's not like I'm married. It's different, Ivy claims. I hold up my left hand. I haven't worn the ring for over a year. Still doesn't change the fact that you were married and just buried your wife, Ivy says. I nod and stand up, taking that as my cue to leave. I turn toward the door but spin back around to Ivy, bending at the waist and placing my face just a few inches from hers. That doesn't change the fact that I love you, I reveal. It doesn't change the fact that I've learned from my mistakes and promised to do right by you and by me for once in my life. Ivy's eyes glimmer in the low light, and I can tell that I have her complete attention. I've been miserable since the day you called everything off and only locked it in when I married Juliana instead of fighting for you, fighting for us. I pause, letting my words sink in a little. Know this, I will fight for us until the day I die. I don't care what's happened in our lives since the first time you went to New York. None of it matters. The only thing that matters is you and me. I lift her chin with my fingers and press my lips to hers, taking a slow, lingering moment to lock in my pledge to her. When I release her mouth, I turn and head towards the door, leaving Ivy with my heart in her hands, knowing that she's the only person in the world who will ever have it again. This is the end of this chapter. Thank you for listening. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. To read the full, unabridged version, you can find a link in the description below. To find out about new releases before the general public, be sure to subscribe to my newsletter. You'll find a link also in the description. Also, to be notified when the next chapter is published, make sure you subscribe to my channel.